Beneath the green hills of North Wales sleeps an entire Roman town. This is not a legend, but a lost settlement, buried for centuries beside one of the ancient world's most prolific copper mines. Today, we are pulling back the earth to uncover its secrets. By the end, you will understand how a single discovery rewrites the story of an empire's farthest frontier. How does a bustling community simply vanish from history, and what forced its people to abandon their homes and hard work? What does it feel like to stand on ground that holds an unseen city? The coastline of North Wales is a place of breathtaking beauty. Rolling green hills meet dramatic limestone cliffs that plunge into the Irish Sea. At the heart of this scene stands the Great Orme, a massive limestone headland rising above the seaside town of Llandudno. Today, it is a haven for tourists with a tramway to the summit, a charming cable car, and grazing herds of wild Kashmiri goats. It feels timeless and peaceful, a perfect escape. But this serene landscape is a master of disguise. For thousands of years, the true nature of this place was not scenic beauty, but immense industrial wealth. The very rock of the Great Orme is laced with rich veins of copper ore, a resource so valuable it drew people here from across the sea long before recorded history began. That green grass and those sweeping views rest upon a foundation forged by fire and metal. The quiet you hear today is a profound silence that fell over a once deafeningly loud and vital operation. This beautiful corner of Wales is not just a natural wonder, it is the carefully abandoned workshop of an ancient superpower, its tools downed, its fires cold, its workers gone, leaving only the earth to hold their secrets. The true scale of this hidden world only came to light by pure accident. In the 1970s, the local council decided to expand a parking area on the Great Orme, a simple act of modern convenience. As the heavy machinery scraped away layers of soil and rock, workers hit something far harder than expected. Their shovels and diggers clanged against ancient timbers, revealing not just a few scattered holes, but the dark, gaping mouths of tunnels that plunged deep into the hillside. The initial assumption was that these were just old mine shafts from the more recent Victorian era, perhaps a century or two old. But when archaeologists were called to the site, they immediately knew this was something entirely different. The timber supports they found were not made with iron nails, but were expertly crafted using a mortise and tenon technique, a method of joinery that hadn't been used in local mining for many hundreds of years. As they carefully cleared the rubble, they began to uncover stone hammers and bone tools, items that spoke of a technology far more ancient than the Industrial Revolution. This was no small-scale operation. The sheer number of tunnels, the systematic layout, and the mountains of discarded stone waste told a story of immense organized labor. The parking lot expansion had unintentionally peeled back a thin layer of the present to expose the brow of a staggering underground city, a labyrinth carved by human hands over countless generations. And if the mining was this vast, a question began to burn in the minds of the researchers. Where did all those miners live? The discovery of the mines revealed an industrial landscape of staggering ambition. Step inside one of those ancient tunnels and you are entering a world carved by firelight. The passages are narrow, often so low that a person must crouch or crawl, snaking through the solid limestone in a bewildering three-dimensional maze. Some shafts plunge over 200 feet straight down, while others branch out horizontally for hundreds of yards, creating a subterranean city with its own streets and districts. This was not haphazard digging. The miners followed the precious copper veins with a surgeon's precision, propping up the ceiling with those ingeniously crafted timber frames to prevent collapse. Their tools were simple but brutally effective. They used stone hammers to smash the rock and wedges made from animal bone or antler to prise loose the ore. Think of the patience, the relentless repetition of hammer blows in the smoky, airless dark. the sound echoing through a network that eventually grew to span over 5 miles. To put that into a modern perspective, 5 miles of tunnels is like digging a narrow, twisting passageway from one side of a major city center to the other, but doing it entirely by hand through solid rock, with only the light from a flickering oil lamp to see by. The scale of production is almost incomprehensible. Archaeologists estimate that over its long life, this one complex produced thousands of tons of copper ore. That is enough metal to make millions of tools, weapons, and coins, a river of red metal flowing from this Welsh headland to feed the needs of an empire. This was not a seasonal camp or a small-scale operation. The Great Orme mine was for its time a factory. It represents a colossal investment of labor, organization, and engineering knowledge. It required planners to map the veins, foremen to direct the work crews, and skilled woodworkers to keep the tunnels safe. The silence that greets a visitor today is the ghost of relentless, thunderous noise, the scent of crushed rock and sweat, and the glow of countless fires used to heat the stone and make it crack. This level of industry demands one thing above all: a permanent, dedicated workforce. You do not run a factory of this size with a handful of nomadic prospectors. You need a whole community living right at the gate, and that realization turned every archaeologist's gaze from the dark tunnel mouths to the sunlit fields surrounding them. If the mine was this vast, then the town that supported it must be buried somewhere close, waiting to tell the rest of the story. The search for that community began on the surface, in the windswept fields atop the Great Orme. Archaeologists surveying the ground around the mine entrances started to notice patterns that had nothing to do with geology. Scattered across the grassland were subtle, circular depressions in the earth, faint discolorations that formed rings. These were the ghostly footprints of ancient buildings, the last traces of hut circles. Alongside them, they found clusters of post holes, dark stains in the soil where wooden support beams had once been driven deep. This was not random debris. This was a blueprint. The layout spoke of intentional design, a small village arranged to support the colossal operation beneath it. The evidence was domestic and unmistakable. Among the grass and heather, they collected fragments of coarse pottery, the kind used for cooking and storage. They found animal bones, the remains of meals, and simple tools for sewing and leatherworking. This was the trash of daily life, not of mining. It proved conclusively that the people working the copper veins did not travel from some distant settlement each day. They lived right here on the job, their homes perched literally above their workplace. Picture a cluster of roundhouses built from timber and wattle, with walls of woven branches packed with clay and roofs thatched with reeds from nearby marshes. Smoke would have curled constantly from central hearths, the smell of burning peat and cooking meat mixing with the ever-present tang of crushed limestone from the mines. These structures were simple, sturdy, and built for a hard life. They would have housed not just individual miners, but likely their families as well. This transforms the site from a remote industrial outpost into a full, breathing community. Children would have played among the huts, their toys perhaps made from discarded copper ore. Women would have processed food, repaired clothing, and managed the hearth, while the rhythm of life was dictated by the comings and goings of the miners, their faces and clothes stained with red and green rock dust. It was a rugged, self-sufficient village, entirely focused on one purpose: feeding the endless hunger of the mines below. The discovery of this settlement solved one mystery, but immediately created a larger, more compelling one. If this was a permanent Roman-era town, where were the stone foundations, the pottery shards of fine Samian ware, the coins, the military paraphernalia, the clear, undeniable stamp of Roman civilization? The huts were primitive, almost prehistoric in their style. This dissonance between the immense, organized industry underground and the seemingly simple village above it became the next great puzzle of the Great Orme. The village above the mines was far more than a haphazard cluster of huts. recent surveys have revealed the outlines of larger, more substantial structures scattered among the domestic roundhouses. These were not homes. One prominent rectangular building with a foundation trenched deeper and more regular than the others suggests a place of administration or storage. Its position, commanding a view over both the settlement and the main mine entrances, feels deliberate, like a foreman's office overlooking the factory floor. Nearby, archaeologists identified a distinct area littered with slag, the glassy waste product from smelting ore. This was the industrial quarter, where the raw copper rock was transformed into usable metal ingots, a process requiring intense, controlled heat and specialist knowledge. The very layout of the settlement points to a clear hierarchy and purpose. It was organized with a military efficiency, likely planned by Roman engineers or the conductors, the private leaseholders who often managed imperial mining operations. Think of it not as a random village that grew around a mine, but as a company town, purpose-built from the ground up for a single, profitable export. The Roman military may have initially secured the site and provided the logistical framework, the order and the security, while the actual mining and smelting were carried out by a mix of local civilian laborers and perhaps skilled workers from across the empire. This blend created a unique social fabric. In one part of the settlement, you might have seen the straight-backed discipline of a Roman military overseer, while in another, the familiar, rounded architecture of a local family's home stood firm against the sea wind. The community was a hybrid, a fusion of imperial ambition and local tradition, all orchestrated to feed copper into the vast Roman economic machine. The evidence suggests a tightly run operation where every person had a role, every structure had a function, and the rhythm of the hammer and the bellows dictated the rhythm of life. Life in this hybrid town was defined by a relentless three-part rhythm. The first and most brutal beat was the work underground. Each day, men descended into the earth with nothing but stone hammers, bone picks, and oil lamps made of simple clay. The air was thick with dust and the smell of sweat and damp rock. In the flickering light, they would swing their heavy stone mauls for hours, the impact jarring up their arms, following a thin green seam of ore that might suddenly vanish, forcing them to start again. The sound was a constant, thunderous percussion of stone on stone, echoing through the narrow tunnels. Above ground, the second rhythm took over at the smelting area. Here, furnaces roared day and night, transforming the crushed ore into molten copper. The air smelled of sulfur and smoke and was filled with the shouts of workers managing the blistering heat. Skilled smelters would pour the glowing liquid into molds, creating rough ingots of pure metal, the ultimate product of all that labor. This was not quiet, pastoral life. It was a loud, dirty, and dangerous industrial existence. The third rhythm was that of sustenance. What did these people eat to fuel such demanding work? Archaeologists sifting through the settlement's refuse have found the answers in broken bones and charred seeds. The diet was hardy and practical. They ate beef and mutton from local herds and pork that may have been raised in pens near the huts. They gathered shellfish from the rocky shore below and fished in the Irish Sea. Barley and wheat were staples, likely turned into a thick porridge or rough bread. But there are hints of something more. Fragments of amphorae, the ceramic containers used for transporting wine, olive oil, and fish sauce across the empire, have also been found. This suggests that while the town was remote, it was connected to the wider Roman trade network. The overseers or merchants might have enjoyed sips of imported wine, a tangible taste of the distant Mediterranean world they served. This blend of local subsistence and imported luxury points directly to the town's social structure. At the bottom were likely the manual laborers, who may have included slaves, convicts, or indebted locals, performing the most grueling and dangerous tasks in the mines. Above them were skilled artisans, the smelters and carpenters whose expertise kept the operation running. and at the top, a small group of managers, either civilian conductors or military officers, who coordinated logistics, kept records, and ensured the precious copper kept flowing to the legionary fortresses and markets. It was a society forged in fire and rock, every person's place defined by their contribution to the single, deafening purpose of metal. Yet the identity of the men who swung those stone hammers remains one of the site's most haunting questions. Who were they? The evidence paints a picture of a community pulled from across the Roman world. Locally made pottery sits alongside fragments of fine, glossy Samian ware imported from Gaul, the kind used for serving food rather than rough cooking. A handful of coins have been found, not in great treasure hoards, but as lost pocket change, minted in far-off places like Rome and Lyon. Even small personal items, like a distinctive bronze brooch, point to styles from other provinces. This was not an isolated tribe. The material culture suggests a melting pot, a workforce gathered from conquered lands. Some were almost certainly local Britons from the Ordovices tribe, people who knew this rugged terrain intimately. They may have been hired for their knowledge or conscripted as part of their tax obligations to Rome, providing their labor in exchange for a measure of autonomy or payment in kind. Others, however, were likely slaves, prisoners of war from military campaigns in places like Gaul or Germania, transported hundreds of miles to this wet, windy corner of Wales. Their lives were defined by brutal, unending toil. Imagine spending 10 or 12 hours a day in a crouch, breathing rock dust in a cramped, pitch-black tunnel, the only light a tiny, smoky flame. The physical toll was immense. Analysis of skeletal remains from similar Roman mining sites shows spines deformed by constant bending, joints ravaged by arthritis, and lungs scarred from silicosis. Life expectancy for a miner might have been only into their 30s. They worked until their bodies broke. This makes their resilience and the community they built all the more profound. In the face of such hardship, they left traces of their humanity. They carved simple game boards into the rock to pass precious moments of rest. They lost personal trinkets, a bead or a pin, in the mud of the settlement. These small, fragile items speak louder than any ledger. They tell us that within this ruthless industrial machine, people still sought connection, played games, and held onto pieces of their identity. The copper they pulled from the earth built an empire, but the fragments they left behind build a far more moving story of endurance. But what made all this suffering and industry worthwhile? Copper was the red lifeblood of the empire. In a world before steel, this metal and its alloys formed the very skeleton of Roman civilization. Pure copper is soft, but when smelted with tin, it becomes bronze, a material strong enough to forge everything from the surgeon's delicate scalpel to the soldier's deadly sword. It shaped the nails that held ships together, the fittings for chariots, the pipes that carried water into bustling cities, and the intricate details on statues of gods and emperors. Perhaps most crucially, copper was essential for the empire's financial heartbeat, coinage. The workhorse coin of daily Roman life, the sestertius, was not silver or gold, but brass, a golden-colored alloy of copper and zinc. Millions upon millions of these coins were struck, and every single one required a steady, massive supply of raw copper. This demand transformed the remote headland of the Great Orme from a windy outpost into a strategic economic asset. The copper flowing from its tunnels was not just local trade, it was imperial fuel. Each ingot produced here was likely shipped across the Irish Sea or transported overland to regional hubs like the legionary fortress at Chester. From there, it entered a vast network, feeding mints and workshops across the province of Britannia and beyond. The weapons that secured the frontier, the tools that built its roads and towns, and the coins that paid its soldiers all contained, in part, metal born from the dark, cramped tunnels of North Wales. This mine was not a marginal operation. It was a critical pressure point, a vital node in the supply chain that sustained Roman power on this island. The empire's grandeur, from its monumental architecture to its far-reaching commerce, rested on foundations dug by the hands of forgotten miners in places just like this. Yet this vital, humming town presented a glaring anomaly to Roman norms. It appears to have been built without walls, in an empire obsessed with boundaries and fortifications, from the mighty walls of Rome itself to the palisades around even small frontier forts. The absence of defensive stone or earthworks around the Great Orme settlement is a powerful statement. Why would such a valuable asset be left seemingly exposed? The first clue lies in geography and politics. By the time the mine reached its peak output, much of North Wales was considered pacified territory. The fierce resistance of the Ordovices had been broken decades earlier by the Roman governor Gnaeus Julius Agricola. The nearest major legionary fortress at Chester was a formidable presence just across the border, a constant reminder of Roman military power. The mine itself may have been considered deep enough within the controlled hinterland that the risk of a large-scale, organized attack was deemed low. Security was likely more about policing and control than repelling armies. A small, permanent detachment of soldiers, perhaps a century of 80 men, would have been stationed on site. Their role was not to man battlements, but to guard the mine entrances and storage compounds, oversee the workforce, and patrol the surrounding area to deter bandits or small raiding parties. Their presence in the administrative building would have been enough to maintain order within the hybrid community. But there was another, more subtle form of security at play, the security of indispensability. The Roman state had a direct and powerful interest in the continuous flow of copper. Attacking this site would not just be an act of rebellion, it would be an assault on the imperial economy itself, guaranteeing a swift and devastating retaliation from Chester. In a way, the mine's very value was its shield. Local tribes who may have resented the operation would have understood that disrupting it would bring the full weight of a legion down upon them, a risk far outweighing any potential reward. The greatest threat may not have come from outside at all, but from within, from the possibility of sabotage by a discontented workforce or the theft of the valuable metal ingots. This is where the soldiers' daily watch, the controlled gates, and the organized layout of the town itself provided the real defense. The settlement was not an open village, it was a secured industrial compound, its boundaries enforced by authority and oversight rather than stone. The psychological landscape was one of controlled production, where the most dangerous forces were not invaders from the hills, but the destabilizing potential of hunger, revolt, or greed from within its own crowded lane. But the most compelling mystery of the Great Orme is not how it thrived, but how it vanished. A town of this size does not simply fade from memory without a trace. So how does an entire community become buried? The first and most patient force is nature itself. When the last furnace cooled and the final miner walked away, the settlement was left to the wind and rain. Without constant maintenance, the timber and wattle walls of the roundhouses would have slowly rotted, their roofs collapsing inward. Wind-blown soil and silt would have drifted into these hollow shells. Seeds took root in the fertile debris, first grasses, then hardy shrubs, their roots breaking apart stone foundations and pulling the last structures back into the earth. Over decades, then centuries, a gentle blanket of soil and vegetation settled over the entire site, smoothing out the contours of the streets and huts until the land looked like untouched pasture once more. Landslides from the steep headland may have contributed, covering lower slopes with fresh rock and earth. This is the standard slow-motion erasure that reclaims most abandoned places. Yet at the Great Orme, there are hints that the burial might not have been entirely passive. Consider the mines themselves. When a valuable vein was exhausted, the tunnels were not left as gaping hazards. For safety and stability, miners would often engage in systematic backfilling, using waste rock to plug old passages. This constant churning of earth directly beneath the settlement over generations could have caused subtle subsidence. The very ground the town was built on might have slowly sunk and shifted, accelerating the process of burial as walls cracked and floors tilted. This creates a fascinating archaeological puzzle. Is the settlement we find today simply a town that fell down and was covered over, or do the patterns of soil and stone suggest something more deliberate? Could parts of the site have been intentionally hidden, perhaps to protect valuable tools or resources with the hope of a return that never came? The distinction is crucial. A natural burial is a story of endings. A deliberate concealment is a story of intention, a final act by a community that still had plans. As archaeologists carefully peel back each layer of soil, they are not just looking for artifacts, they are reading the circumstances of the town's last days, searching for clues in the way the earth finally closed over it. The silence that settled over the Great Orme was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a machine that has suddenly stopped. So what caused this vital community to pack up and walk away? Archaeologists have pieced together several compelling theories, each with its own evidence and its own haunting implications. The first and most straightforward idea is that the copper simply ran out. After centuries of relentless extraction, even the richest veins can be exhausted. The miners may have followed the last profitable seam deeper and deeper until it finally pinched out into worthless rock. When the metal stopped flowing, the entire reason for the town's existence vanished. The conductors would have calculated the costs, seen the dwindling returns, and ordered a systematic withdrawal. This theory paints the abandonment as a quiet, economic decision. The furnaces were extinguished for the last time, tools were gathered, and the community, now unemployed, dispersed to find work elsewhere. The settlement was left not in ruins, but simply empty, a shell whose purpose had expired. The evidence fits, as the deepest tunnels show signs of being worked right to the very end of their viability. But history is rarely so clean. The timeline of the Great Orme's peak activity coincides with the slow unraveling of Roman power in Britannia. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the empire was in crisis, pulling legions back from distant frontiers to defend its heart. The military detachment that provided security and oversight for the mine may have received orders to march east, leaving the settlement dangerously exposed. Without that guarantee of safety and the logistical framework of the Roman state, the complex operation would have been impossible to maintain. Political instability could have made the transport of heavy copper ingots too risky, severing the economic lifeline. In this scenario, the town didn't just become unprofitable, it became untenable. The people may have left not by choice, but because the protective umbrella of the empire had been folded up and taken away. Then there is the possibility of sudden, violent catastrophe. Mining is perilous work even today. A major tunnel collapse triggered by an earthquake or the cumulative strain of centuries of digging could have buried dozens of workers and made entire sections of the mine lethally unstable. A fire, perhaps starting in the timber supports or the smelting quarter, could have raged through the tightly packed wooden huts. Such an event would have been a psychological breaking point, a sign from the gods or the earth itself that the price for this copper had become too high. The community might have fled in terror, viewing the site as cursed, leaving everything behind in their haste. While no single layer of ash or dramatic subsidence has yet been found to prove this, the ever-present risk makes it a shadow that hangs over the site. The truth likely lies in a combination of these pressures. Imagine the situation. The best ore is gone, making the work harder and less rewarding. Rumors reach the town of soldiers leaving Chester, of raids increasing in the hills. The future feels uncertain. Then perhaps a smaller tunnel gives way with a roar of falling rock, a grim reminder of the dangers that were always there. It would not take much to tip the balance. A community living on the edge of the known world, fueled by a distant empire's demand, is inherently fragile. When the economic, political, and physical risks all began to align, the decision to leave may have felt less like a choice and more like an inevitable conclusion. They gathered what they could carry, took one last look at the homes built over the echoing dark, and walked into a changing world, allowing the Welsh soil to slowly, patiently claim every trace of their industry. And then the land fell silent for 1,000 years. With the departure of the last inhabitants, the Great Orme's purpose was utterly forgotten. The Roman Empire crumbled, new kingdoms rose and fell, and the headland returned to the rhythms of wind, grass, and grazing animals. The sophisticated industrial town was erased not by conquest, but by the profound amnesia of the passing centuries. The people who came after had no memory of the empire that had once prized this place. To the medieval farmers and shepherds who worked these slopes, the strange depressions in the earth were simply features of the landscape, perhaps formed by nature or by the old people, a vague folk memory with no specific history attached. They built their stone field walls, sometimes unknowingly using stones that had once been part of Roman foundations. They plowed fields and tended flocks directly over the buried floors of roundhouses, their sheep cropping grass that grew from soil rich with ancient charcoal and pottery dust. The very name Orme is thought to derive from an Old Norse word for sea serpent, a poetic description of the headland's shape with no link to its buried past. For generations, life here was defined by the seasonal cycles of agriculture, not the relentless extraction of metal. The only whispers of the past were physical anomalies that puzzled those who encountered them. A farmer digging a post hole might strike a strangely worked piece of timber far underground. A sudden subsidence in a field could reveal a dark, yawning hole that seemed to lead nowhere. These were often dismissed as natural fissures or filled in quickly for safety, their true significance completely lost. Even early antiquarians and mapmakers who began cataloguing Britain's ancient sites in the 17th and 18th centuries missed the truth. They noted the dramatic limestone cliffs and the prehistoric burial chambers on the Orme, but the vast mining complex and its town remained invisible, a secret kept by the soil itself. The industrial past was so thoroughly buried that it became, in every practical sense, a part of the natural world. This profound ignorance is what makes the modern discovery so startling. For centuries, people walked, farmed, and celebrated atop an entire Roman settlement, their feet just inches from a story they could never have imagined. The treasure was not hidden in a remote cave or a distant forest, but directly beneath the most ordinary of human activities, waiting for a time when a simple parking lot would finally break the long silence. The silence was finally broken not by a shovel, but by a series of beeps and hums. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, archaeologists returned to the Great Orme armed with a new kind of vision. Before they could even think about digging, they needed to see the unseen. They turned to the quiet detectives of modern archaeology, geophysical survey tools. One of the most powerful is magnetometry. This involves walking slowly across the field with a device that measures tiny variations in the Earth's magnetic field. Why does this work? When ancient hearths burn, the intense heat actually realigns the magnetic minerals in the surrounding soil and stone, creating a permanent, faint magnetic signature. A filled-in ditch or a pit full of organic waste will also have a different magnetic quality than the undisturbed ground around it. By systematically scanning the entire area, the magnetometer builds up a detailed, ghostly map of what lies beneath the grass. It reveals the straight lines of buried walls, the dark smudges of old hearths, and the circular patterns of long-gone roundhouses, all invisible to the naked eye. Another key tool is ground-penetrating radar. This device sends pulses of radio waves into the earth and listens for the echoes as they bounce off buried features. A solid stone foundation will reflect a different signal than soft, disturbed soil from an ancient post hole. Think of it like giving the ground an ultrasound, creating a cross-sectional image of its hidden anatomy. Together, these non-invasive methods allowed archaeologists to map the entire buried town without breaking the surface. They could see the street plan, identify different districts like the industrial smelting area and the residential zones, and even pinpoint the best places to dig, transforming a vast, mysterious field into a detailed archaeological blueprint. This high-tech map then guided the delicate, painstaking work of excavation. Here, speed gives way to meticulous slowness. Archaeologists don't just dig holes, they peel back history layer by literal layer, a science called stratigraphy. They start by removing the topsoil, the modern plow zone, carefully watching for any change in color or texture. As they go deeper, each distinct layer of soil, ash, rubble, or clay represents a different chapter in the site's story. A dark, charcoal-rich layer might be the floor of a building, sealed by a yellowish layer of collapsed daub from its walls. A compacted, gravelly surface could be an ancient pathway. The key is recording the exact position and relationship of every find, every stone, every fragment of bone within these layers. A Roman coin found in the foundation trench of a roundhouse tells us the building was constructed after that coin was minted. A beautiful piece of Samian ware smashed on a floor gives that moment a date. It is a giant, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where the picture is the story of daily life. Modern science then takes these physical clues and extracts secrets the Romans never intended to share. Soil samples from hearths and pits are floated in water to recover tiny seeds and pollen, telling us what crops they grew and what the landscape looked like. Fragments of animal bone are analyzed to understand their diet and butchery practices. Even the microscopic wear patterns on a stone hammer can be studied to confirm it was used for mining and not for farming. Each small discovery is a pixel in a growing image. Through this combination of broad geophysical surveys and intensely focused excavation, the chronology of the town has come into sharp relief. We can now see that it was not built all at once, but expanded organically over centuries, adapting to the growing scale of the mines below. We can trace how the settlement's focus shifted, how buildings were repaired or replaced, and how the community evolved. This is not just finding artifacts, it is resurrecting context. It is using the quiet hum of a machine and the gentle scrape of a trowel to listen to a story the earth has been holding for over 1,000 years, a story of order, industry, and a community living on the edge of an empire. These silent tools and fragments are the true voices of the Great Orme. While the geophysical maps show us the shape of the town, the artifacts pulled from the soil tell us the texture of its life. Each find is a direct link to a moment, a decision, a person. The most fundamental objects are the tools of the trade. Antler picks, worn smooth from gripping hands, show where miners used the strength and resilience of nature to prise copper from stone. Heavy stone hammers, their surfaces battered and chipped from countless impacts, still feel dense and potent in the hand. You can almost hear the echo of their use, a rhythmic percussion that defined the settlement's existence. These are not delicate artifacts, they are implements of brute force, telling a story of relentless physical labor. But life was not all work. The pottery tells a parallel story of daily routine and subtle social lines. Archaeologists find great quantities of coarse, gritty ware made from local clay. These were the everyday pots used for cooking stews over a hearth, storing grain, or holding water. They are simple, sturdy, and purely functional. Then, among these humble pieces, appear fragments of something entirely different, Samian ware. This is a fine, glossy red pottery, imported all the way from Gaul. Its surface is often decorated with elegant raised patterns, figures, or scenes. This was the Roman equivalent of fine china, used for serving food at a proper table. Finding it here on this wind-swept headland is profoundly telling. It means someone in this community, likely a manager or a merchant, was dining with a level of sophistication that connected them directly to the heart of the empire. It speaks of status, of trade networks that stretched hundreds of miles, and of the desire to maintain a Roman identity even in this remote posting. Coins provide the ticking clock for the entire operation. Stray coins lost in the mud, a sestertius here, a denarius there, are not treasure hoards. They are accidental time capsules. Because Roman coins often carry the emperor's face and title, they can be dated quite precisely. A coin of Emperor Hadrian, found in the foundation layer of a smelting workshop, tells us that building was erected during or after his reign. Coins from later emperors like Antoninus Pius or Marcus Aurelius show the town was still active, still connected to the imperial economy deep into the 2nd century. They are tiny, metallic anchors pinning the town's vibrant life to the broader timeline of Roman Britain. Yet the most moving discoveries are the small, personal items that had nothing to do with industry or status. A simple bronze brooch used to fasten a cloak against the sea wind. Carefully carved gaming pieces made from bone or stone, evidence of men trying to pass the time in a dimly lit barracks or roundhouse. But perhaps the most poignant find of all is a child's leather shoe. It is small, perfectly formed, and worn thin at the heel and toe from running and playing. This single object collapses the distance of centuries in an instant. It forces us to remember that this was not just a mine, it was a home. Children lived here. They laughed, they played chase between the huts, they outgrew their shoes just like children do today. That tiny shoe, discarded and lost, is a silent testament to the families who built a life on this rugged frontier, whose world was defined by the mine below but filled with the universal moments of childhood above. It is in these intimate objects that the buried town stops being an archaeological site and starts being a community we can almost touch. That small leather shoe speaks of a life lived in a very specific world. To truly understand the community, we need to step beyond their tools and homes and see the landscape they saw every day. What did North Wales look like 2,000 years ago? Thanks to a branch of science called environmental archaeology, we can now reconstruct their world with remarkable clarity. Scientists don't just dig for artifacts, they collect seemingly mundane samples of soil, peat, and silt. Within these samples are tiny, time capsule secrets. The most revealing of these are ancient pollen grains. Pollen is incredibly tough and survives for millennia in waterlogged or sealed conditions. By extracting and identifying these grains under a microscope, researchers can build a precise picture of the local plant life. The pollen record from around the Great Orme tells a story of human impact. There is evidence of a landscape that was significantly more open and deforested than the area is today. The reason is directly tied to the mine's hunger. Smelting copper requires immense, sustained heat. To keep those furnaces roaring day and night, the community needed a colossal amount of fuel. They would have systematically cleared the surrounding hillsides of trees, primarily oak and ash, for charcoal. This created a visible scar on the environment, a halo of cleared land around the industrial hub. The view from the settlement would not have been one of dense, untouched forest, but of managed slopes, with coppiced woodlands being carefully harvested for fuel and patches of grassland for grazing animals. The animal bones found in the settlement's rubbish pits add another layer to this picture. The high proportion of sheep and goat bones suggests these animals were grazing on those cleared hillsides. Cattle bones indicate some richer pastureland in the valleys below, likely used for draft animals that helped transport ore. The climate itself played a silent, powerful role. During the Roman period in Britain, the climate was in what scholars call the Roman warm period, a phase of slightly warmer and drier conditions than in the centuries before or after. This had practical, daily consequences. A longer growing season meant more reliable crops of barley and wheat, crucial for feeding a non-farming population. Drier conditions made mining somewhat easier, as tunnels would have been less prone to flooding and collapse from water seepage. It also made the constant need for wood more acute, as the drier air was better for both logging and for the controlled burns needed to make charcoal. This reconstructed environment changes how we imagine daily life. The air would have carried the scent of wood smoke from the furnaces, not pine forest. The soundscape included not just hammers and waves, but the bleating of sheep on the grassy slopes and the shouts of woodcutters in the remaining stands of trees. It was a human-shaped world, a testament to how completely this community dominated its immediate surroundings to feed the empire's demand. Their survival and success were literally carved from the local landscape, tree by tree, until the very earth and climate became part of the industrial machine. But the Roman town was not the beginning of the story on this headland. To understand the true weight of this place, we must zoom out across millennia. The Great Orme copper mines are not merely a Roman industrial site. They are among the oldest and largest prehistoric metal mines on the entire planet. Their story begins not with imperial engineers, but with the first farmers of Britain over 4,000 years ago. Deep within the labyrinth, archaeologists have uncovered tools and workings that date back to the Neolithic period, the Late Stone Age. These earliest miners used nothing more than stone axes and fire to crack the rock and reach the precious green ore. They worked on a smaller scale, but their ambition was the same: to extract the magic from the stone. This activity continued unbroken through the Bronze Age, when demand for copper and tin exploded to make the tools and weapons that defined the era. The Great Orme became a crucial production center, its metal likely traveling across ancient trade routes that connected communities across Britain and into Europe. For over 2,000 years, generations of people returned to this same mountain, each leaving their own mark in the tunnels. When the Romans arrived in the 1st century, they did not discover a new resource. They walked into a landscape already deeply scarred by industry, a place with a legendary reputation for metal that stretched back into the mists of time. What the Romans brought was not discovery, but scale. They saw the existing mines and recognized their potential with the cold, calculating eye of an empire. They applied their engineering prowess, their military organization, and their insatiable economic demand to a site that was already ancient. They industrialized a sacred mountain. Using iron tools, advanced timbering, and a regimented workforce, they expanded the tunnels to depths and lengths the earlier miners could never have achieved. They turned a seasonal, perhaps ritualistic activity into a relentless, year-round factory. The Roman town we have been exploring represents the peak of this long arc, the moment when local tradition was swallowed by global machinery. This continuity is what makes the Great Orme utterly unique. In most of the world, you might find a Neolithic flint mine here and a Roman lead mine 100 miles away. But here, in this one limestone headland, you can literally walk through time. You can touch a wall scarred by the stone hammers of a Bronze Age child, and then, just a few feet deeper, see the precise, squared timber frames installed by a Roman engineer. It is a palimpsest of human endeavor, layer upon layer of the same fundamental desire to bend the earth to our will. This settlement was not an isolated outpost. It was the latest and most intense chapter in a story that had already been writing itself for longer than Rome had existed. The miners, whether Neolithic, Bronze Age, or Roman, all shared the same dark, cramped, dangerous world underground. They all followed the same glowing seams, breathed the same dust, and dreamed of the wealth it promised above. The empire simply provided the loudest, most efficient chorus in a song that had been humming beneath this soil for centuries. This long history of continuous mining sets the Great Orme apart, but how does it compare to the wider Roman world? To understand its true significance, we must place it alongside the empire's other great industrial landscapes. Far to the south, in the sun-baked hills of southwestern Spain, lies Rio Tinto. This was the Roman Empire's single most important source of silver and copper, a mining district so vast and toxic its rivers ran blood red with acidic waste. The operations there were colossal, involving aqueducts to bring water for hydraulic mining and settlements that grew into small cities with amphitheaters and temples. The scale was industrial in a way that dwarfed even the Great Orme, but the core principles were identical: a highly organized workforce extracting metal for the state, living in a company town built around the pits. Closer to home, across the Bristol Channel in Cornwall, the Romans pursued another precious metal, tin. They took over existing prehistoric mines, much like in Wales, and established coastal trading posts to ship the ingots out. The social organization was likely similar, with military oversight and a mix of local and imported labor. Yet the Cornish sites often lack the clear evidence of a large, permanent residential settlement right atop the mines themselves. This is where the North Wales site carves out its unique identity. It sits at a fascinating midpoint. It lacks the sheer, overwhelming imperial grandeur of Rio Tinto, but it possesses a more complete and intimate community footprint than many smaller outposts in Cornwall. Its uniqueness is a product of its geography and its deep past. Geographically, it was profoundly isolated. Perched on a headland in a province that was itself a frontier, it was a world away from the Mediterranean heartland. This isolation forced it to be more self-sufficient, a tighter, more insular community where every person was directly linked to the single industry. But its most defining feature is that seamless integration with the prehistoric past. At Rio Tinto or in Cornwall, the Romans were the primary industrializers. At the Great Orme, they were inheritors. They walked into a sacred industrial landscape, a mountain already hollowed out by 2,000 years of veneration and effort. Their town wasn't built on virgin soil, it was constructed atop a foundation of myth and memory. This gave the site a spiritual weight alongside its economic value. The Roman engineers may have seen only copper, but the local laborers they employed likely saw something more, a place where their ancestors had toiled for the gods of the earth. This blend of cold imperial efficiency and ancient local tradition makes the buried town not just a mining settlement, but a cultural crossroads where the pragmatic machinery of Rome met the deep time of Britain itself. So what does this ghost town actually look like from above? While we cannot yet walk its streets, modern technology has allowed us to sketch its bones. Picture an animated map, a transparent overlay on the green fields of the Great Orme. The geophysical surveys reveal a settlement that was not a random scatter, but a planned community hugging the contours of the land. The most prominent feature is a central trackway, a main street of sorts running along a relatively level terrace. This would have been the muddy, well-trodden artery of daily life, connecting the different zones of the town. Branching off from this central spine, the magnetometry data shows clusters of those circular anomalies, the footprints of roundhouses. These form distinct residential quarters, likely organized by kinship or trade. The houses are not crammed together haphazardly, but spaced with room for small yards or animal pens, suggesting a need for both community and a measure of privacy in this crowded place. To one side of the settlement, the scans show a different signature altogether, a large area of intense magnetic disturbance. This is the industrial heart, the smelting quarter. Here, the ground is permanently stained by the intense heat of countless furnaces and the chemical residue of slag. Its placement makes practical sense, downwind of the main living areas to keep the worst of the smoke and smell away from the homes. And on a slight rise, overlooking both the residential clusters and the industrial zone, sits that rectangular foundation trench. This is our best candidate for the administrative center, the foreman's house or the military overseer's quarters. Its position is commanding, a place from which one could observe the entire operation, the comings and goings at the mine heads and the smoke rising from the furnaces. This proposed layout tells a story of Roman efficiency imposed upon a local building style. The roundhouses are traditionally British, but their arrangement into distinct districts feels Roman, a logical zoning of life and work. The challenge, of course, is that this map is an interpretation of shadows. We are reading the whispers left in the soil. Only a tiny fraction of this proposed town has ever been excavated through careful, hand-dug trenches. These trenches are like keyholes, offering narrow but invaluable views to confirm what the machines suggest. A trench cut across a circular magnetic anomaly might reveal the actual post holes and hearth of a roundhouse, proving it was a home. Another trench in the industrial zone uncovers a thick layer of charcoal and furnace lining, confirming the smelting activity. Each small excavation validates the larger, invisible map. The difficulty is immense, for the town is not buried under empty land, but under a protected landscape of scientific and natural importance. Archaeologists cannot simply strip the entire hillside bare. They must work with pinpoint precision, using these technological surveys to guide their surgical investigations. Every new trench adds a detail, corrects a line, and deepens the picture. We are not looking at a completed map, but at a sketch that becomes richer and more detailed with every season of quiet, meticulous work. The invisible town is slowly coming into focus, street by hypothetical street, home by confirmed home, revealing the careful order behind what must have seemed, to a visitor, like a chaotic and thunderously loud frontier outpost. The very act of its disappearance became the town's salvation. Being buried by time was not a tragedy, it was a perfect act of preservation. For over a millennium, that thick blanket of soil and turf protected the fragile remains from the very things that destroyed so many other Roman sites. It lay undisturbed by the deep plows of medieval and later farmers, which elsewhere churned up and scattered ancient layers. It was safe from the stone robbing that repurposed Roman walls into later buildings. It escaped the sprawling urban development and industrial projects that transformed so much of Britain's landscape. The town was not lost, it was placed in a kind of suspended animation, sealed in a time capsule of earth. This is the great paradox of the Great Orme. Its abandonment and burial were the very things that kept its story intact, waiting for a time when we could listen. Today, however, that long period of safety is over. The site now faces a new set of threats, more subtle but just as dangerous as any invading army. The first is the relentless pressure of the modern world. This is a beautiful, popular headland. The needs of tourism, agriculture, and even conservation landscaping constantly test the balance between access and preservation. A new walking path, a drainage ditch, or the roots of a newly planted tree can all unknowingly slice through archaeological layers that have survived for 1600 years. Then there is the slower, more insidious enemy, natural erosion. The wind and rain that once gently buried the site are now, exposed by small investigations, able to wash away vital context. But the most profound modern threat is one the Romans never could have envisioned: climate change. Increasingly severe weather patterns bring heavier rainfall to North Wales. This saturates the ground, threatening the delicate preservation of organic materials like those crucial timber supports in the mines. More intense storm surges batter the base of the headland, potentially destabilizing the cliffs and the archaeology they contain. The stable environmental conditions that held the site in stasis for centuries are beginning to shift. This is why every excavation is now also an act of rescue. Archaeologists are not just digging to discover, they are digging to save information before it is lost forever. Each season's work is meticulously planned, not to expose the site fully, but to take its vital signs, to understand its vulnerabilities, and to rebury and protect what cannot yet be sustainably studied. The goal is no longer simply to uncover the past, but to steward it. This means using non-invasive surveys as the primary tool, only digging small, keyhole trenches when absolutely necessary to answer specific questions. It means detailed recording, three-dimensional mapping, and sampling of soils for environmental data that might be degraded in future years. Every artifact, every post hole, every layer of charcoal is documented with the understanding that this may be the only chance to read that particular page of the story. Responsible archaeology today is slow, careful, and profoundly ethical. It recognizes that we are temporary custodians of this narrative, not its owners. The buried town is a non-renewable resource. Once a layer of soil is removed, that unique arrangement of objects and information is gone forever. The choices made by archaeologists now will determine what questions future generations, with technologies we cannot yet dream of, will be able to ask. This is not just about preserving stones and bones. It is about safeguarding the very possibility of wonder, of connection, of understanding the resilient, complex lives that once echoed through this now silent ground. These whispers in the soil are now given form and color. Digital artists working hand in hand with archaeologists are performing a new kind of excavation, one that happens entirely inside a computer. They take the precise data from geophysical surveys, the exact measurements from excavated post holes, and the catalog of recovered artifacts, and they begin to build. Layer by digital layer, the invisible town rises from the ground. A simple post hole in the data becomes a sturdy timber upright. A cluster of hearths defines the center of a roundhouse. The magnetic smear of the industrial zone transforms into a row of furnaces, their vents glowing with simulated heat. The result is not a guess, but a rigorously tested hypothesis in visual form, a three-dimensional model of what the settlement likely looked like at the peak of its operation. This digital reconstruction allows us to soar over the headland as it was 2,000 years ago. The view from above reveals the town's intimate relationship with the mine. You see the main trackway, a muddy thoroughfare winding between clusters of circular thatched roofs. Thin plumes of smoke rise from hearths inside the homes, while a much denser, darker column billows from the smelting area. Down on the virtual ground, the scene comes alive with purposeful activity. Figures move along the paths, some carrying baskets of ore, others driving small herds of sheep toward the pastures. By the furnaces, you can almost hear the roar of the bellows and see the shimmer of air above the hot stone. The reconstruction makes the site's logic instantly clear, showing how the residential areas were carefully placed upwind of the industrial smoke and how the overseer's building commanded a view of it all. This is far more than a pretty animation for a documentary. These virtual models are powerful scientific tools. Archaeologists can use them to test theories in ways that physical excavation cannot. They can ask questions like, does the proposed roof line of this building block the sight line to the mine entrance? Would the prevailing wind, as we know it was, have blown furnace smoke directly into the village with this layout? By manipulating the digital model, they can experiment with different building densities, test drainage patterns, and even simulate the spread of fire, all without disturbing a single grain of protected soil. A reconstruction is never the final answer, it is a dynamic question. When a new trench uncovers a previously unknown structure, the entire model can be updated, refining our vision of the community with each new discovery. It turns abstract data into a lived-in space, a place where we can visually walk alongside the ghosts of the past and finally see the world they built, not as scattered fragments, but as a complete, breathing landscape of industry and home. The whispers of the past have become a powerful voice for the present. For the modern communities of North Wales, the buried town and its ancient mines are far more than an archaeological curiosity. They are a profound source of local pride and a vital connection to a deep industrial heritage. This story of copper and community, stretching back over 4,000 years, has been woven into the very identity of the region, transforming how people see the landscape beneath their feet. The discovery that their home was a crucial workshop of the ancient world has instilled a powerful sense of place, a recognition that this windswept coast has always been a place of innovation, resilience, and global significance. It is a narrative that counters any idea of remoteness, instead positioning North Wales at the heart of a story that helped shape empires. This connection is actively celebrated and shared through a remarkable portal to the past, the Great Orme Ancient Mines tourist attraction. Here, visitors don't just read about history, they step directly into it. The attraction is centered around the actual prehistoric mine workings, allowing people to walk and often crouch through the very tunnels carved by those first miners. The experience is visceral and immediate. The air is cool and damp, the stone walls are scarred with countless pick marks, and the scale of the hand-dug labyrinth is humbling. This is not a replica, it is the real, ancient industrial landscape, carefully conserved and made accessible. The interpretation brilliantly connects the dots across time. Guides and exhibits explain how the Romans later arrived and scaled up this existing operation, effectively taking over the family business of an entire mountain. You see the prehistoric stone hammers and then learn about the Roman timbering techniques that allowed them to dig deeper. It creates a seamless timeline, showing continuous human endeavor rather than separate, disconnected chapters. This balance between public access and preservation is delicate and constantly managed. The tourist route uses only a small, stable section of the vast tunnel network, protecting the more fragile archaeology elsewhere. Above ground, paths are carefully routed to avoid disturbing the buried settlement, relying on those digital reconstructions and viewing platforms to tell the story of the town without digging it up. The economic impact is tangible, drawing visitors from around the world who come not just for the scenic beauty of the Orme, but specifically for this journey into the depths of history. It supports local jobs from guides to hospitality and reinforces the value of cultural heritage as a sustainable resource. Yet the true value goes beyond economics. For schoolchildren on a field trip, it makes the Romans and the Bronze Age shockingly real. For a local resident, it adds layers of meaning to a daily walk. The site answers the simple, powerful question, what happened here? The answer, that people lived, worked, dreamed, and shaped the world from this very spot for millennia, turns a beautiful landscape into a sacred one, a place where every green hill holds a city and every quiet field remembers the thunder of industry. Even with all we have uncovered, the buried town guards its deepest secrets closely. The map we have is still a sketch, filled with tantalizing blank spaces where the most human parts of the story remain hidden. One of the biggest gaps is the exact size and layout of the main residential area. Our geophysical surveys show clusters of roundhouses, but are these the entire town or just one neighborhood? Did the settlement spill down the slopes toward the sea, where erosion may have washed evidence away? Finding the full footprint is crucial because it tells us the true scale of the community and how many souls called this windy headland home. Then there is the silence on matters of the spirit. Every Roman community, from the grandest city to the smallest fort, had a place for worship. It might be a grand temple to Jupiter or Mithras, or a simple shrine to the local genius loci, the protective spirit of the place. But at the Great Orme, not a single definitive religious structure has been identified. Where did these people go to pray? Did they honor the Roman gods in a small chapel? Or did they maintain older, local rituals at a sacred spring or a grove of trees that has long since vanished? A single carved altar or a deposit of ritual offerings would open an entire window into the community's fears, hopes, and how they blended their beliefs in this frontier melting pot. Perhaps the most profound mystery lies with the people themselves in the missing cemetery. We have found where they lived and worked, but not where they were laid to rest. A Roman burial ground, even a humble one, would be an archaeological treasure trove. The bones themselves are a biological archive. Analysis of skeletal remains could answer fundamental questions that artifacts alone cannot. Were these miners mostly locals, or did their DNA show origins from across the empire, from North Africa to the Danube? What was the true physical cost of their labor? We could see the fractures from rockfalls, the arthritis from constant crouching, and the lung damage from years of breathing stone dust. The absence of a cemetery is a strange void in an otherwise vividly detailed site, a silence that leaves the most personal chapter of their story unwritten. These are not dead ends, but invitations. They are the questions that fuel the next generation of research. Future excavations, guided by ever more sensitive technology, will target these specific mysteries. Imagine ground-penetrating radar fine enough to detect not just walls, but the subtle disturbances of individual graves. If a cemetery is found, the science we can apply is transformative. Stable isotope analysis of teeth can reveal where a person grew up, tracing a childhood spent drinking water from the Alps or from the Welsh hills. Ancient DNA can untangle family relationships within the community, showing us kinship groups and genetic links to populations across Europe. Even the soil in burial plots can be analyzed for pollen, telling us what flowers they chose to place with their dead. Each unanswered question is a locked door, and every new scientific technique is a key being forged. The story of this buried town is not a finished book sitting on a shelf. It is a manuscript still being decoded, with its most revealing paragraphs waiting beneath the next turn of the soil, promising to tell us not just what these people did, but who they truly were. The leather shoe of a child lost in the mud of a Welsh headland holds a truth far larger than itself. This buried town compels us to rewrite the story of Roman Britain. For too long, our image of the province has been dominated by two extremes: the stark military frontier of Hadrian's Wall and the civilized comfort of southern villas with their mosaic floors and heated baths. The Great Orme shatters that simple duality. It reveals a third, equally vital Britain, an industrial Britain. This was not a land merely conquered and garrisoned, but a land systematically mined, its very bones cracked open for profit. The empire's presence here was not symbolized by a straight stone wall, but by a twisting, dark labyrinth. Its legacy was not a grand basilica, but a mountain of slag and a community forgotten beneath the sod. This site forces us to see the province not as a passive territory to be administered, but as an active economic engine, a critical piece of machinery in the imperial system. Every ingot of copper smelted here fed the mints that produced the army's pay, the workshops that forged its tools, and the ports that built its ships. The distant decisions made in Rome or Londinium directly dictated the daily rhythm of life in this remote town, from the food they ate to the timbers that held their tunnels safe. This was the empire's true face in many places, less about imposing culture and more about organizing extraction. The complex hybrid community that lived here, with its local roundhouses and imported Samian ware, its military oversight and its multilingual workforce, is the direct result of that economic imperative. They were not there to Romanize the landscape, they were there to process it. Their town is a monument to a specific kind of empire, one built on relentless resource hunger. It reminds us that the grandeur of Rome was underwritten by countless places like this, where the earth was turned inside out and communities were forged in the soot and din of industry, far from the marble and poetry, yet essential to its very existence. That small leather shoe, then, is our final guide. It leads us from the dark of the mine, through the smoke of the smelting quarter, and into the roundhouse where a family lived, a story now complete. Our journey began with a simple parking lot and a hidden landscape, and it has revealed an entire world. We have walked with the miners in their cramped, echoing tunnels, felt the heat of the furnaces that lit the night, and stood in the ghostly footprints of a town built for one purpose. The Great Orme is a testament to human endeavor on an epic scale, to the relentless drive of an empire for the resources that fueled its power, and to the quiet, patient processes of history that first bury and then, miraculously, reveal our shared past. This is not a tale of kings and battles, but of anonymous hands and daily resilience. It shows us that history is not always written in stone, but often in soil, slag, and lost belongings. The next time you walk across a green field or a wind-swept hill, pause for a moment. Consider what might lie just beneath the surface, what stories are waiting in the silent dark. Our understanding of these hidden chapters depends on the careful, vital work of archaeology, a science that pieces together whispers into a narrative. If you want to see these stories continue to be told, support your local museums and heritage organizations. Let us know in the comments what other historical mysteries you would like us to explore next, and subscribe to join us on our next adventure into the forgotten corners of our world.